So this is a presentation. What has the United Nations done for women's rights? And the point of this presentation is that by understanding what the United Nations is and what women's human rights conventions and work the UN has done, we can understand better how to promote women's sex-based rights, because those are the rights that are being undermined, that the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights is worried about. It's quite a useful way of us arguing, because it's an international, the United Nations, as you know, is international, and women's human rights internationally, there's a lot that's happened via the international, but via the UN. So I am just going to minimize this so I get to see what I say. Okay, so what has the United Nations done for the rights of women and girls over the last 50 years? The United Nations is an international organization set up in 1945, made up of 193 member states. It provides a forum for its members to express their views in the General Assembly, Security Council, ECOSOC, which is the Economic and Social Council, and other bodies and committees. By holding meetings and hosting negotiation, the UN helps governments to find areas of agreement and solve problems together. It's the closest we have to a global government. Its bodies include the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and UN Women, but many, many more. Before looking at women's rights, we're going to look at human rights. Human rights were mentioned in the 13th century, the 1215 Magna Carta, which said, "We will sell no man." Then the English Bill of Rights in 1688 affirmed the rights for a group of people, English men, to have trial by jury and to seek to change laws. The 1776 American Declaration of Independence called for rights for men, but many of those men were slave owners, and which they did not see as a contradiction. They were calling for men's rights. And in 1789, the French Revolution called for liberté, égalité et fraternité, which is freedom, equality, and brotherhood. But this freedom was not extended to the black slaves in the French colony of Haiti. So sailors went across the ocean in 1789 and said, "We've had a revolution, it's fantastic, we're going to have freedom, equality, and brotherhood." And the slaves on the plantations, sugar plantations in Haiti said, "Fantastic, we'd like that freedom." And they sent the boat back and said to the French revolutionaries, "Oh, well, does that go, you know, what's happening? What should we do? Should we include the slaves?" And they said, no. What we meant was liberté, égalité, fraternity for white men. So they then had a war to try to stop the slaves having freedom, which they lost. Right, there's been a growing demand for men to be treated fairly with each other. Two 18th century women pointed out that women's rights were being overlooked, Olympe de Gouges and Mary Wollstonecraft, but neither were listened to. De Gouges' 1789 Declaration of the Rights of Women and of the Female Citizen led her to being convicted of treason and executed by the French revolutionaries. Well, Wollstonecraft's 1798 Vindication of the Rights of Women was ignored, and she died at 38 after giving birth to Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. In the 20th century, the biggest step forward for human rights came after World War II, when nations got together to form the United Nations. Human rights were mentioned 7 times in the UN Founding Charter, making the promotion and protection of human rights a key purpose and guiding principle of the organization. Then, in 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as in this photo, brought human rights into the realm of international law. So this is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. Eleanor Roosevelt, sorry, I'll go back to this one, was recognized, and so there's a picture of her here, as the driving force behind the declaration. The UDHR has 30 articles. Number 1 says, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act toward one another in a spirit of brotherhood. So, although the Declaration preamble reaffirms a commitment to the equal rights of men and women, The whole text refers to people as he and him. For instance, Article 12 says no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honour or reputation. So, whilst human rights are generally agreed to be a good thing, and equal rights for men and women were noted and were a good step, so they promoted equal pay. So this is in 1948, ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Committee, adopted this resolution calling for equal pay for equal work of equal value. It was still a problem because they simply asserted that all people should have equal rights and act in a spirit of brotherhood to one another. Whereas the problem is women are not just overlooked men who once noticed can be offered men's rights. Women need some rights of their own, the main ones being reproductive rights, because we have female bodies with wombs, etc. So we need the right to contraception, abortion, protection during maternity, and the right to protection from mistreatment and exploitation in both the public and private life, including within the supposed haven of this private family. Now, this is the two 18th century women who advocated for women's rights, explicitly asking for women's rights and realizing we couldn't just be included in men's rights. These are some women. This is the United Nations, so you can see how they meet. This is in New York. So the UN did set up an organization to promote women's rights in 1948, the Commission on the Status of Women, which is called the CSW. The Commission meets every March, apart from last year, and draws over 9,000 women and quite a lot of men from all regions of the world to the UN's New York headquarters, with delegates representing and advocating for an estimated 3.7 billion women and girls worldwide. Official government representatives and accredited NGO leaders meet in the UN building in Manhattan, whilst everyone else attends fringe meetings in halls and meeting rooms in the NGO in the vicinity nearby. So just while I mention that, Women's Human Rights Campaign is planning to run a fringe meeting at next year's March 2021 CSW, where we're going to push our message of women's sex-based rights. So watch this space and we'll keep promoting that. And if anybody's interested in helping with that, that would be great. So among its activities, the CSW has drafted several conventions and declarations, including the Declaration on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in 1967, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, which entered force in 1981. That's CEDAW, the second one. This convention, CEDAW, stipulates that reproduction, giving birth, and caring for kids should not be the basis of discrimination. It also acknowledges the social implications of motherhood and states that childcare and maternity are integral rights and should be extended to all realms of the lives of women. It states it's a human right for women to decide freely and responsibly on the number and spacing of their children and to have access to the information, education, and means to enable them to execute their rights. And that any state party to the treaty is required to provide education on family planning and reproductive rights, including various forms of contraception. CEDAW has been ratified by 189 states, including the world's newest, South Sudan, but not by the United States. In addition to CEDAW, the CSW has taken other measures to address reproductive rights. So it hosted 4 global conferences: Mexico City in 1975, Copenhagen 1980, Nairobi in 85, and Beijing in 95. This last conference resulted in the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and it's thought to be the most comprehensive articulation of international commitments to women's human rights that exists. So the UN body that promotes women's rights is UN Women. It doesn't just ask for women's rights with these declarations and convention. It also has plans, actions, and it has a strategic plan. So it's trying to get all the other UN actions to include thoughts about women's rights and what they call gender equality into all of the programs. So, for instance, to implement women's rights into the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The UN does not have a convention on violence, but it does organise a day against violence against women, which is coming up at the end of this month, I think, very shortly, at the end of November, in a couple of days, an international day against violence against women. And it also urges all states to accede or to join to sign up to the Istanbul Convention, which was organised by the Council of Europe. But that is the main international convention against violence against women. So the CEDAW committee also does a thing called periodic reviews of states that have signed the CEDAW convention, and it makes recommendations on what states should do to improve women's rights. So in a recommendation in 2019, after a visit to the UK, the CEDAW experts said that they thought the UK should make abortion in Northern Ireland legal. And they noted that not doing so is what they called a grave and systematic violation of women's human rights. So the law in Britain, in the UK, was in fact changed very shortly after that, a few months after that recommendation from the UN, from CEDAW, came through. And the UK government cited, I should show you this picture. I'm sorry, I've been going backwards on these pictures. So this is the place where the House of Commons Library, this is the UK situation. They are citing that a duty was placed on the UK government to introduce these recommendations. So it shows that in some cases, the United Nations can put pressure on countries and can influence law in favour of women's rights. And it can have a real impact. So next one, the United Nations has also helped women globally to believe that they have the right to speak up, control their own bodies and lives, and to be treated with dignity. They're supporting Afghan women, as this woman here, taking part in the peace process. They're supporting NGOs working to eliminate female genital mutilation. And they've been publicising domestic violence globally during COVID. They support women like this Rimu, who set up a literacy project in a refugee camp, and this woman Fatima, who's working to promote peace in Nigeria. So there is, though, however, despite all this fantastic work, and it really is fantastic work. The UN has done a lot to promote women's human rights, but this is all possibly becoming unravelled. So one of the problems is that the UN is underfunded. Another problem is that religious and patriarchal forces in some countries are changing the laws and pushing back against women's human rights, like the ban on abortion in Poland recently and the attempts to restrict abortion in America. And the UN doesn't have much power to do much. They've protested about the changes in Poland, some of the human rights experts at the UN, but they have not, they can't do much more than that. And the biggest challenge that we are worried about, Women's Human Rights Campaign, is the challenge if they redefine the term woman, and women, which used to be defined on the basis of body and women's reproductive function, is now defined as a belief or an identity, it's going to undermine and unravel all of the rights and the legal protections that we have had, or pretty much all of them. For instance, we won't be able to get sex disaggregated statistics. We've got in our declaration, the Women's Human Rights Campaign, we explain that we have 9 articles explaining how women's human rights, as promoted in these UN declarations and conventions, are going to be undermined by gender and identity ideology. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and that gives you some background to how we can use United Nations instruments to promote our work.